Criticize your average woman's hairstyle, and you make an enemy for life. Criticize her character, and you make yourself public enemy number 1. HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. Runaround is a short story by Isaac Asimov about 2 men, Powell and Donovan, stationed on Mercury with their robot Speedy. The plot revolves around the accidental creation of a mystery, the solution to which is needed to prevent the astronauts' deaths. Donovan had sent Speedy out on the surface to collect a substance vital to their survival. He hadn't come back, and they've discovered that he is running in circles around the target site, maintaining a set distance from it. They gear up and go out after him, only to find him acting so strangely that they cannot even approach him. Other clues indicate that he had detected volcanic action at the site with results that could damage or even destroy him. Once they figure that out, Powell reminds Donovan that because Speedy is, quote, extremely specialized and as expensive as a battleship, his programming is unusual. Normally, he'd have been programmed with the 3 laws of robotics in order of importance. These are: 1. A robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. 2. A robot must obey orders given it by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law. 3. A robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. In Speedy's programming, the last 2 are equal. He is as averse to taking damage as he is to disobeying an order. Donovan's order wasn't stated as a life or death imperative, just a go-to-location get-substance mission. As a result, Speedy is stuck in a loop between don't disobey and don't take damage, leading him to maintain a distance from the threat and a pattern of movement at which his relation to the 2 imperatives is equal. Feminists have something in common with Speedy. They're not robots, but they're still kind of programmed, and their rules create a conflict that seems to prevent them from discussing human rights issues without a similar reaction. Consider the identitarian's loyalty to the cult. Women are wonderful, right? And feminism is about equality, of course. These rules are unquestionable, and nearly every interdisciplinary studies student has them drilled into his or her head. Criticize anything about the movement, and you're sure to see someone pop up in your conversation just to alert you to the dictionary definition of feminism. They cannot deal with any argument that doesn't defer to it. There are several different ways to articulate it, but Oxford Online has simplified it to the advocacy of women's rights on the ground of the equality of the sexes, and that does seem to encompass the gist of the other definitions. But if equality is what the movement really wants, the idea of equal consideration for men and boys wouldn't throw them into a paradox that short-circuits the entire conversation. We've talked before about the negative-sum game in which that consideration is seen to eliminate compassion for adversity that society otherwise cares about when only women's experiences are considered. That phenomenon gets even more knee-jerk when accountability comes into question, with equal expectations of women being seen as wrongly exempting men, leading to much wailing and gnashing of teeth. Negative-sum loud. We see this every day on social media, in their responses to complaints about anti-male discriminatory law and policy, or research that ignores men's experiences and then gets used to justify government initiatives that benefit women at men's expense. For example, try mentioning the circumstances faced by male victims of female sexual violence. The combined ideas of equal consideration for men and expectation of equal accountability from women do not compute with feminists. Result? Keeping them on topic is nearly impossible. Some try to redirect back to female victims. Some try to pacify the debater by claiming to agree on the subject of gay rape, showing only that their compassion for male victims is limited by the sex of their perpetrators. Many deny, castigate, deflect, and block. Often the discussion gets trapped in a blame-throwing loop. This is because it creates a paradox among aspects of feminist ideological and social programming, beginning with the female oppression narrative under patriarchy theory, which does 2 things to their concept of identity. First, They think largely in terms of demographic rather than individual, so that their response to information about any woman ends up being not about her, but to the group women, which for feminist women includes themselves, and for feminist men includes milady, or every woman he knows. This manifests in the aforementioned debate as a supposition. You say women can be perpetrators? You're calling women perpetrators. How dare you talk about me, or milady, that way? Don't believe me? Try discussing the impact of custody interference and alienation of fathers on their children. See how much shining armor comes out of the woods as both sexes rush to defend the sainted single mother against the scourge of dastardly deadbeat dads. Second, it leads to damaging group identities. Patriarchy theory makes the female identity victim. It makes the male identity either perpetrator-oppressor or victim of other men's masculinity, but not quite so victimized as a woman who requires protection from other men. We'll call this the embattled hero identity for short. The one good man, as Allison has described, is one category of embattled hero. Another is the effeminate guy who can't be himself because you're too rugged. I might have to write about that guy sometime soon, because I keep running into him on Twitter, along with the recovered toxic masculinity addict, feminism's version of the redeemed sinner in savior-based religions. No deviation from this identity script is allowed. Feminism ties women's value as human beings to their victim identity, and men's value to their service or benefit to female victims. Known victim becomes synonymous with good person in the female identity, while victim in denial is a bad person. Obviously, perpetrator-oppressor would be men's bad person identity, and embattled hero would be the good. This programs into the feminist mind an aversion to recognizing that women can act as abusers or even make bad choices, as the listener's good person identity would be challenged. Throw in recognition that female abusers can victimize men, and the perceived challenge becomes an all-out assault. Feminists, therefore, are set up to see men's rights advocacy as an attack on women regardless, but they also don't want to consider themselves prejudiced against men. It's pretty normal to want to be seen as a good, compassionate person. This is an aspect of the mental health of any social being. It's part of one's self-image, viewing oneself as deserving to be loved and appreciated, a condition which relies on exhibiting socially approved characteristics, and being a net benefit to one's community and one's society. Without it, what's left? Rejection? Condemnation? Exclusion? Social exile? So what's a victim identitarian to do? Ideologically, they must object to inequality whenever they consider a condition or circumstance to benefit men to the detriment of women. But they cannot abide the same when the conditions or circumstances in question benefit women to the detriment of men. Even acknowledging such a phenomenon would come into conflict with their female victim, male oppressor identity. But those factors are becoming more and more apparent in everyday political discourse. They also cannot recognize that any of men's advantages might have been achieved by facing, enduring, and overcoming adversity through hard work, dedication, personal development, and self-sacrifice, and that such is the pathway to achieve those particular advantages. That's why the wage gap myth just will not die. The perpetrator-oppressor identity requires that men's advantages must be ill-gotten, thereby creating a debt to women. This is also why the definition refers to rights, but not responsibility. She who cannot be accountable cannot be responsible, especially not when it's hard, uncomfortable, unpleasant, dangerous, or expensive. The movement can only support a standard that will improve women's outcome without imposing any obligation or consequence on them, even if that means deflecting those to men. Yet they cannot admit that their narratives promote inequality. They cannot acknowledge that their characterization of men is derogatory, cruel, and hateful. They cannot even consider the idea that women's advocacy might be remotely responsible for any disadvantages faced by either sex, and they certainly can't take responsibility for reform, because that would require admitting that reform is needed. Like Speedy the conflicted robot, they have to maintain a distance and pattern of movement at which their relation to these contradictory factors is equal. That is feminism's brand of equality, not a partnership between men and women, but a complicated dance between irresponsibility and authority, hatred and social acceptability, prejudice and the appearance of being a human rights activist. And they've been stuck in that loop for over 200 years. Women are oppressed.
Based on what evidence?
Women face hardship.
Men also face hardship.
Women's hardship is harder.
What's the difference?
Women are oppressed.
Based on what evidence?
Women face hardship.
Men also face hardship.
Women's hardship is harder.
What's the difference?
Women are oppressed.
Based on what evidence?
Women face hardship.
Men also face hardship.
Women's hardship is harder.
What's the difference?
Women are oppressed.
Based on what evidence?
Women face hardship.
Men also face hardship.
Women's hardship is harder.
What's the difference?
Women are oppressed.